It's at this point in this story where Jesus pivots to the camera, if you will, and stops talking to Nicodemus. Now, this happens a lot in John's gospel, where there'll be this interaction, this dialogue, and then Jesus is like, okay, guys. And scholars are like, should we put quotations around that or not? Is that the fourth evangelist talking, or is that Jesus talking? And then scholars are like, does it really matter? Because the fourth gospel is so inherently kind of total in its understanding that the fourth evangelist, the writer, is speaking his understanding of who Jesus is and what Jesus is about. So whether these words are in the mouth of Jesus or not is almost irrelevant, because this is the fourth evangelist talking about what really matters. And of course, this next section is about being born again, about the saving work of Jesus, this most famous piece of scripture that ends up on t-shirts at football games, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that everyone who believes in him might not perish but have everlasting life, which we can all memorize and is delightful. It comes out of this interaction with Nicodemus. Now I'll start by just looking at, Nicodemus says, these signs that you have done, they are clearly of God. But this is the beginning of chapter 3, so we literally only have 2 chapters before this where apparently such amazing stuff happens that everybody's convinced that Jesus comes directly from God. And interestingly, there's only really 2 things that are named that happen before this that are signs of the power of Jesus. Now it mentions that other stuff happened, and you can conclude that those might be healings or some other miraculous forms, but the 2 things that are named before this are really interesting. One is that Jesus makes the party go on and on and on, right? The wedding at Cana, the first sign. I mean, it's awesome. Is it what's going to help you believe that this is the Messiah? That there's just more wine and it's really good? I mean, like, yeah, I'm here for it, but I'm not sure unless there's something else under it. And the same with the temple. So in the other Gospels, Jesus cleanses the temple at the end. It's the very last thing he does. It's like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? That's when it gets serious. In John's Gospel, it happens right up front in chapter 2. It's one of the first things that he does in his public ministry, and everybody remembers it. He goes town to town, and they're like, oh, we were in Jerusalem. We remember what happened. And this is the one where when people want to say that Jesus is nonviolent, somebody else is like, I do remember him braiding a whip of cords and getting kind of cray. And there's lots of great paintings of this out there. Now, I don't believe that the whip of cords was used against people. I believe he was trying to drive animals out, because it lists all the animals that are in there. And they're kind of big, and they don't really respond well to a human just being like, please go. Right? You got to have a little oomph in it. For all those animal lovers out there, I apologize, but reality is reality. And a braided whip of cords is a thing that happens sometimes. Now, in and of itself, somebody causing a ruckus, I don't know, that's not really getting me to buy into Messiah. There's a lot of ruckus that happens. There was ruckus 4 years ago that didn't lead me to believe that God was there. So what's the deal? What's under these signs that Nicodemus, a leader of the Judeans, potentially someone even on the Sanhedrin, like on the Supreme Court basically, would say, you've got something? Well, what do these 2 things point to? Well, the first one points to abundance amidst scarcity, and points to celebration and the worthiness of celebration when things are hard. That feels like God to me. And the second one points to this deep discomfort with the way that wealth and power corrupt access to God. That feels like God to me. And so Nicodemus comes to Jesus, I think, very much perceiving the subtext of these miraculous signs. And he says, we don't take him seriously, right? Like, is he really talking about climbing back into the womb? Like, that just seems dumb. And sometimes we look at him and we say, well, God, this guy's an idiot. He really doesn't get it. I don't think so. I think this guy's very sophisticated. I think he's playing with Jesus. And he's really asking, can I change? Like, do you really think that this all can change? Do you really think that our generations of subjugation can change? Can we start believing in abundance when we've been experiencing scarcity and believing in scarcity for so long? Can we start believing in access to God when the wealthy and the powerful have been restricting it so long that we feel obligated to do it the way that... Can I really live in the world that you're talking about? And Jesus' answer is, well, you have to be born again. And I think about, what does that mean to be born? And if you think about being born, right, before you're born, someone else is managing all the things for you. What you eat. They don't really manage when you sleep, because you just get to sleep whenever you want, right? And then you just poke them in the kidneys or whenever you want. But like, the world is managed for you. Being born means entering into a world of uncertainty. It's bright, it's loud, it's intense, and you have to like discern and make judgments, and you have to choose now all of a sudden. And you didn't have any choices before. I mean, you had kidney or liver, right? But you didn't have a lot of other choice. Bladder, right? We didn't have a lot of other choices. But now in the world, you're born into this space of incredible uncertainty. And when you're in a place where you have choices, there's a new thing you can do, and it's called failing. A lot, nearly constantly, for a long time. And that's what being a kid is just like failing. And fortunately, you don't, well, depending on who you are, you don't care all that much. Some kids care a lot about failing, and some kids really don't. And so then these questions come about, well, do I want that? Am I ready for this new space that I don't know and understand and can't control? This new reality that you're promising that feels exceedingly risky, that I am certain that I'm going to fail in, right? Like, I think about Nicodemus and the ways that there's so many prescriptive ways of being for him. The path is laid out, right? And the question is it a groove or is it a rut? Is he in the groove and he's doing his thing and he's producing and he's in alignment and he's got a vibe like those guys that work at Chipotle when it's really crazy and they're just like boom, 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 right? They're in a groove. Or is he starting to realize, oh man, when Jesus showed up and shows me these other things, I'm like, oh, that's a rut. That's my wheel just kind of always going back. And we know those thought processes in our minds where we're trying to do a new thing, but that's how it works. We've always done it this way. I can't imagine it being different. I can't imagine a different reality. So, well, it's worked for me before. I mean, that rut goes places. I know you guys just went cross-country skiing, right? And that, man, those are very comfortable, very comforting, especially when you're going downhill. Like, where is my rut at, right? But it also means it's very hard to deviate. It's very hard to do a new thing, very hard to possibly even imagine a new thing. And we wonder, can we change? Can we change? And I think that we absolutely can change because God made us to change. That God intended for us to be not just agents of change, but creatures of change. See, I think we imagine being static because it helps us kind of have an identity and have a vision for ourselves into the future. We have a path and things and places and people and stuff help us get this like imagination of how things will be and how things will go and what it'll look like. And so when those things start to change, we start to lose those places, those people, those spaces, those things. That future doesn't exist anymore because those things and those places and those people aren't there anymore, or they're not with us in the same way. And we can't, that place we were going to get to if we stayed in the groove now doesn't exist. And it's terrifying. And we have this vision of the future of who we're going to be and how we're going to feel. ready to say, you know what? I can change. I can let go of that. And Nicodemus isn't ready. And he knows he's gonna follow this guy, which he ends up doing miraculously. He's gonna have to figure out if he can change, and he can change because God intends us to be people who change. But that means that we're gonna lose our identities, right? Because part of who are you? Think through your identities. Often they're connected to what you do, or who's in your life, where you live, what you have. Most of the things we would say about ourselves, about who we are about some dynamic, some contextual reality that we live in. That's, maybe it's laced together, and maybe it's really holistic, right? We're the same person in all these different places with all these different people, or maybe we're different people in different places with different people. Maybe we do a lot of code switching. I'm this person over here, and I'm very serious and very measured, and then over here I'm loud and cray-cray, and over here I get to be funny, and over here I'm really gentle, and like I'm different because the spaces need me to be different, and I show up to give gift in these places. Or maybe I've got a life where I can really be my whole and complete self, all these places that I go. But often that's because of what's been built there. The networks of relationships and connections, the way that you're known and seen, the way that you're allowed to be your full self. And what happens when that changes? What happens when that person's not there anymore? What happens when that space doesn't convene anymore? Are we not there anymore? Are we not anymore? And I think Nicodemus is asking this question, and I think Jesus' response about being born again, his kind of not really dialogue, his monologue after this, is really answering this question. What will remain if I change? And the thing that will remain is the new identity that we always had that maybe we forgot. The new identity that will remain that we always had is that we are loved by God and God goes with us. I sat with a woman last week who showed up here randomly, needed some help getting a bus ticket, and had a really hard time accepting that, but knew that she needed it, right? And so had humbled herself enough to come to some random church she didn't know anything about, right? And ask for what she needed, which God, I'm so proud of people that are willing to do that. It's just incredible. And so I told her, I need you to remember 3 things. You are loved by God. And God will always go with you wherever you go. And that your feelings will help point you to your values if you allow yourself to feel them. I don't know why I picked those 3 things. They were just the things that came up for me, but I have felt consistently like those are the things that will get us through any of the changes we have to face, is trusting that there is a God who loves us, and that God will always go with us through every kind of change, through every kind of difficulty, through whatever we have to face. And we have to feel whatever the feelings are that come up so that we can release that future that we had imagined, that groove that became a rut in our life, and so that we can live not just for the sake of living, but for the sake of that core identity, that identity of the wine that overflows, that identity of abundance and celebration and joy, that identity of the tables overturned and the animals leaving, that identity of freedom in connection to God. That abundance and celebration and freedom, those are the things that God wants for us. And maybe we have to let go of some place that has defined us, some space that has shaped us, because maybe it's becoming a rut and it's preventing us from accessing that freedom and that celebration and that abundance